everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Coaching Call podcast. On this podcast, we'll cover various types of coaching by trainers in sports, martial arts, fitness, and business. We'll discuss each coach's methods to getting the most out of their respective athletes or clients and how they attempt to change the platform in which they coach. Join us on a fun adventure as we discuss unique coaching styles. Coaching is a universal part of how we get others to get something done. Join your host, Raphael, and his guests on this unique journey in coaching.
Hi, I'm Sifu Raphael, and this is the Coaching Call podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. This episode was made possible by listeners like you. Good morning, Jim. Thank you so much for joining me on Coaching Call. How are you today?
I am awesome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good. Excellent. So today we're going to talk about parenting. It's an incredible thing when we think about the impact that every parent can make on their child, right?
Absolutely. It's a gift and it's a responsibility both at the same time.
Gift. I like the way you put it. A lot of people don't consider it that way.
Yeah.
They believe that they're a gift to the kid, and it should be the other way around, right?
Yeah. And part of the reason I say that is I like to encourage parents to think of the parenting process as an opportunity for their own personal development and growth. You are presented challenges and difficulties as a parent, and those are just obstacles and learning opportunity or teaching moments, if you will, for yourself, not just the child, but for the parent as well. So
Right.
that's how it's a gift.
Right. No, I totally agree. I tell a lot of people that the reason you may have a child is so that the child can teach you how to become a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. You don't know until you do it. It's one of those things, you can't fully appreciate that perspective or that experience until you've actually stepped into it. And, you can talk a lot about it. And on the same token, it just came up just a day or two ago. My wife was saying that a man can't appreciate what a woman goes through as they are pregnant and go through the birthing of a child, which we never will. But it's interesting. Sometimes we think we get it when we don't, but it's parenting's like that. You have to go through the experience to be fully immersed in it in order to really start to appreciate and be able to take advantage of those opportunities for growth.
Yeah, no, I like the perspective of like we can't ever imagine what it's like to give birth to a child. And it's got to be such a beautiful experience. And of course, don't get me wrong, the ladies do go through a lot of pain in when they give birth. I'm number 10 of 12, so I can only imagine.
There you go. And for your listeners, we have 6 children. So my wife has been through it 6 times now. So
wow, congratulations, 6 years. That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's a fun thing, and we have grandchildren now, so it's a growing family, continues to ever grow.
So is that a double on your grandchildren? You have 12 grandchildren?
Yeah, we do have 12 grandchildren right now, and actually our 13th grandchild is due in a couple of weeks.
Oh wow! Congratulations!
Yeah, so we'll cross over that double mark.
So at one point, let's even go now into it. The difference between being a parent and a grandparent. It's got to be so different. Am I right?
It is different. And it's interesting because, sometimes I'll talk to parents about their role as the parent of an adult child. And really the teenage years are the intro or the starting of that shift in your role to which then continues on when your children become adults. And you are always going to be the parent. I mean, our oldest child is now, 37? And we still are the parent, right, to him. And there's still that parent-child relationship, but it's different than it was when he was 5 years old, right? And it's sort of evolved, and that process starts evolving really as we move through the teen years. But as a grandparent, it's even, there's different because your role is, one of hopefully empowering and supporting your child to be a parent, but then you also have a relationship with the grandchild. And that can be very valuable to both the grandchild and to the parent, because it's, it is an extension of the family and a growth of the family. And you become another, as a grandparent, you are another sort of place within the family that helps that child feel at home and helps that child to feel connected to the family if you develop that relationship. And a grandparent can be a great mentor to a child as they grow and develop, especially up into their teen years. So now sometimes, and with our grandchildren, some are local and some are not local. So the ones that aren't local, we don't get to spend as much time with one-on-one. But when we are there, the goal is to develop and nurture that relationship and build connection so that you can be there as another source of influence, or another mentor, if you will. And so that's how it's a little bit of a different role. But you have to be careful that you don't try to step into the role of the parent, though. That's the one thing that I think can cause conflict between a grandparent and their child, is if the parent or the grandparent starts to try to step in and be the parent. That's not my role, right? And I have to let my child in effect be the parent, which that sometimes can get a little bit, you want to pass judgment or tell them how to parent, which is really not the role.
Correct. It's funny. I've spoken to some parents and some grandparents, and the roles that they have are so different, because sometimes the child will be treated differently than the actual. Let me rephrase that. So a person will say, I never spent time with my dad or my mom, but they spend so much time with my son or my daughter. And reason being is that we have to realize that maybe when that parent, who is now the grandparent, was working and they worked so much, they didn't have the time to spend with that child. Now their child comes around, and all of a sudden they see the misconnection that they had, and they want to now put into it, right? Now they want to put the effort into it because maybe they're retired, maybe they have the time. And then the other funny thing I always consider is they spoil the grandchildren, and then at the end of the day, they're like, whoop, go back to your parents,
Right.
because now you're not my responsibility. So yeah, they will give them all the bad things like chocolate and candy and all these things, and then send them back, and then the parents have to deal with the hyperactive child who's just like gone nuts and has had an amazing experience with their grandparents, and then they come back home to maybe a parent who's working all the time.
Right. Yeah. And one of my messages to parents and to families is that it is a journey, and it's ever evolving and ever changing as you go through that journey. And in the example that you gave, I mean, as a grandparent now, I have a different perspective and appreciate those relationships differently than I did 20 years ago. And that's just because I've evolved and grown as a person over time. And the same thing happens with our kids, and they grow and develop and move through their life. And so that parent it's a journey, because they're always faced with new circumstances. When you're the parent of a 6-year-old, you deal with certain issues and difficulties. But when that child turns 10, there's a new set of issues and difficulties that you're going to deal with. And then when they turn 15, there's new things you're going to deal with. And so it's an ever evolving journey. And and people will ask us sometimes, did we parent different with our first child than we did our 6th child? And the answer is yes, we did. Because we grew and developed and learned, and things shifted as time went on. And to be quite honest, with ours, there's enough of an age gap that the world environment that our youngest grew up in was different than the one our first grew up in. And so again, that's part of the journey as well. And so we just have to recognize that it is an ever evolving process. And part of I always tell people, one of the most important things you can do as a parent is to adopt a growth mindset.
Right.
The premise that I'm going to be growing, learning, and developing through this. And that's my first job, is to be open to that possibility and step into the opportunity to learn and grow and be open to it.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the things that it always gets me is when someone doesn't understand, like middle child syndrome, if you will, right? Or
Right.
last child syndrome, the way the parents treat them, and the kids see it. They're like, well, uh, I'm the baby, so that's why I'm treated this way, or I get all the things. Like, for example, somebody recently said that they gave their 18-year-old a brand new car. Meanwhile, their 26-year-old never got a car.
Right.
And then they're like, it's so unfair.
Yeah. Right.
My
Right.
brother got a car and I didn't. What was that all about? And why was I treated so differently?
Yeah.
And I think it's, every child is so different, especially, you can have, like I have two boys, and they're night and day, you know. Um,
Absolutely.
you have one that behaves one way, another one that behaves totally, like, who are you, and where'd you come from, right?
Right. Yeah.
You get that experience as a parent as well, right?
Yeah. And so you have to, that's where I'm saying you have to be willing to look at it as a journey. And again, whether it's the dynamics of the home, another one I'd throw out is, we had 6 children.
Mm,
And when the first child left the home, the dynamics within the home changed,
of
right?
course.
Because now there's a different dynamic there. And when the second one left, dynamics change again. So again, it's just this ever evolving process. And so part of my message to parents is around, and I've written a book on how to be the parent your teenager needs you to be. And
Mm,
it's around, there's some fundamentals though that we as parent can work on. It's sort of like the basics, if you will. And if you focus on these fundamentals, it puts you in a position to deal with the ever-changing circumstances, because the circumstances are going to change and you're going to be faced with different issues. But ultimately, what we want for our children is for them to go off and launch into their adult life,
mm.
and to be, I say successful with quotes around it, because it's not always about being, getting the best job or whatever. It's about them being able to feel that they have some sense of joy in their life and that
Mhm.
they're on purpose. I
Right.
mean, and I'll use, the analogy. I mean, if you had a son or daughter that was very successful from a material standpoint, but they were miserable and unhappy, the
Mm,
parent still would feel, they would feel that pain. But
right.
on the flip side, if you had a child that was maybe had meager means from a material standpoint, but they had a tremendous relationship with a spouse and they were just joyful and very much on purpose in what they did, that's really what we want. And so, part of this process and the fundamentals are around how do we put our children in a position to be able to launch out into their life and experience that purpose, that sense of peace, that sense of joy, and the sense that they are connected and make a difference in the world. I mean,
Mm.
that's to me that's how I define success from a family perspective.
Yeah, I love it. The more I listen to you, the more I realize that you are truly connected as a parent. And the reason I say that is because those kids are not born with instructions, are they?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you mentioned connection. That's one of my 3 fundamentals, is
Mm,
how do we build connection and in effect, have the child, because the opposite of that is if the child feels isolated or alone. I
mm,
mean, and there's nothing worse than thinking about a child. I mean, the classic example is they walk into school and they go into the lunchroom and they have no friends and they sit at a table by themselves, right? I mean, as a parent, that just stabs you in the
oh,
heart because you
yeah.
feel so badly for that child because they are disconnected, they're isolated, they're alone.
Mm,
And we all experience that. And that's one of the human conditions, is this sense that, okay, are we off on our own? And the counter to that is building connection. How do we build connection? How do we establish the relationship and make the home? And when I say the home, it's the parent a
Right.
safe place.
Mhm.
This is a safe place where the child is loved unconditionally. They always know it's there. It's a, like say, it's a haven, if you will. And
Yeah.
that's one of the fundamentals is how can I always be working on and be intentional about building connection with the child? And I talk about gifts. That's a huge gift
Mhm.
to give that child, is if they have that sense of connection, because they take that with them everywhere they go.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the interesting thing. If they go off into school as a teenager and, one of their friends does something that in theory would be hurtful to them, and they start to feel that, they always know they can come back home. Home's a
Mhm.
safe place.
Right.
And so that lessens the blow, if you will, of something that may happen at school or within their friend group. Because even if something there happens that's negative, they always know they have that safe place and that connection to home. And it gives them strength in that moment. So that's one of the fundamentals, is, building connection.
Well, you had me thinking when you were talking about a safe haven, but unfortunately, a lot of kids don't have that, and it's so sad to see the not only the verbal abuse, but the physical abuse that kids go through at home
Right, right,
be- because the parents did not get the instructions with the kid when they were born, right?
right,
So for me, that is such a painful thing. And when we think about the love that every child should receive, but maybe they're not getting it, you know. And this is why, I always say that, when we think about sometimes jails are full of kids who didn't have that safe haven
right,
because they had nothing to look forward to. They were always getting beat up at home and at school, or they became the abuser because maybe they were getting it at home and that's all they know how to do.
right.
So we got to think about, and I appreciate the fact that you gave a safe haven to your kids, but not all kids have that. So, I mean, we have to be as real gets because it's not, apple pie,
Right,
and football games every day. It's real life for some people where, you know, they don't know, if they did something right or if they did something wrong, they get treated the same way. It doesn't matter. There's homes where people are being abused just because they're there. It's not because of something they did. So all of a sudden they start thinking, what did I do wrong? And maybe,
right,
it becomes a hardship on so many people.
right.
So as much as you're talking about a safe haven, and I appreciate that, and I know there's a lot of homes that are a safe haven, but we also have to consider the fact that, there are places that kids can maybe go to who don't have a safe haven, right?
Yeah, outside of the home, and sometimes that's where a grandparent can come in, or an
Mm,
aunt or an uncle. They can provide that connection. And to speak to what you're talking about, part of my goal and my mission with this work is to help break the cycle that repeats itself
mm,
within some of those family environments. Because you're right. Obviously, if everybody's home was in an ideal situation, we wouldn't have,
right.
the other day I heard, it's statistics about suicides and drug abuse and alcohol. All this stuff seems to be growing, and it's a function of the stuff that we're talking about. And
Mhm,
so the question is, how do you break that cycle? And it's kind of points to, I mentioned I have these three fundamentals I like to work with families around. And actually the first fundamental when I work with parents is about that parent and their own, as I mentioned, their own personal journey and their own personal growth and
mm,
development. Because really, and you kind of mentioned it, 80%, 90% of what that child learns, they really just learn by the modeling or the example that the parent is setting. And so the first step in this is to have the parent start to work on themselves, if you will. And the way I position it with parents is the idea that within us, we have two competing mindsets. One of them is fear based, and one of them is love based.
mhm,
And the question is, in any given circumstance or moment, Are you coming, or are you responding out of fear, or are you coming from or responding out of love? And the damage that we cause happens when we're in that fearful mindset, or that fearful perspective, if you will. And that's where the trouble comes. That's where the damage comes. And so the question is, how can I, as a parent, start to shift and maybe, change that circumstance? And so the techniques that I like to share with parents is, the first thing is to become really aware of what you are experiencing as a parent.
Mm.
And there are signs that you're in a fearful mindset, or signals. And it's typically the emotion that you're experiencing. If you're experiencing anger, for example, or frustration, you talked about the violent homes, or where there's some abuse. I mean,
Mhm.
typically it's a parent that's experiencing some kind of anger. Anger is a sign that you're in a fearful mindset, or you're acting in unloving ways.
Right.
And so the first step in this process is self-awareness. Sort
Right.
of notice, oh, wait, I'm starting to get angry.
Mm.
And so if you become aware of that, then the second step, and I try to encourage people to think of, okay, I got to create a pause. How can I create a pause here,
Mhm.
so that then I can make an intentional choice? Because that's the next step, is I can make a choice then to try to shift my perspective. Um, and so it's that awareness, create a pause. Now I can choose to look at this particular circumstance or situation differently,
Mhm.
through more of a love-based mindset. And when I do that, I talk to parents about, how can you introduce some forgiveness into this situation? How can you introduce some compassion, into your perspective? Gratitude. These are love-based perspectives that help to shift an environment, and how you see something. And then what happens is you respond differently. When you're coming from compassion, you respond differently than when you're coming from isolation or fear. And it's interesting. Anger comes out. It's that fight or flight response.
Right.
If the parent is feeling, um, not worthy, or they feel disconnected, or unappreciated, or unloved, they're either going to fight or flight. And a lot of times it comes out as fight, which is anger. But
Mhm.
it's a fear that I don't belong, or it's a fear that I'm not good enough, or I can't do this. That's where it starts.
Right.
And so you got to catch yourself there again, create a pause, and see if you can then shift into that more love-based mindset. And to be honest, that's the 80-90%. It's the old 80-20 rule. That's the primary function of the parent, is to manage themselves. Everything else will then kind of flow out of that. And to break the cycle, start with yourself. And I actually use this analogy of being a hero within your family.
Mm.
And I,
Like
I
that.
use this storytelling technique of a hero's two journeys. And the premise is, the hero takes a stand for love within the home. Even when all the signs and situations point to, maybe I shouldn't be acting from a loving perspective, or a love-based mindset, I still take a stand for love, is what the hero does. And so there's this sort of theme that runs through some of the work that I do around it, being a hero, and the hero's two journeys that we all are on. So anyway, that's the first of my three fundamentals that I really work with people.
I love it. I love it. And this is the question that I keep asking myself. How did you become so understanding as a parent? And then later on, not only for your own children, but to make a difference in other parents and other children? Because in order to help children, you need to help the parents first, right?
Right, exactly. Which actually, I might, if I just mentioned the hero's two journeys,
Right?
I might just share a little bit of my background, and kind of
Yeah,
how
let's
I
go ahead.
got here. And it incorporates this idea of a hero's two journeys. So if you don't mind, I'll take 5 minutes and sort of give you some of that background.
Well, my
And
question for you is on your background is, and you, I'm sure you're going to cover it, but I have several questions. One is, how was your childhood like? How are your parents? Which one do you feel made a bigger impact on you? Because sometimes it's both, sometimes it's one or the other. Sometimes it's a grandparent or an uncle. So
Right.
Those are the questions that, and I'm sure you're going to cover it anyway, but go for it.
Yeah. So my journey, I always like to say that I have spent the last 40 years studying the topics of personal development, parenting and family enrichment, if you will. And more importantly, though, I've spent those last 40 years applying the lessons learned as a parent and as a husband. And as I mentioned, I have 6 children. And then I always like to throw out, I think of myself as the classic example of the hero's 2 journeys. And for your audience that may not be familiar with this idea, it's a storytelling technique that's often used in movies or books. And what it entails is the main character is on 2 different journeys within a movie, let's say. The first journey is known as the journey of accomplishment. They have this task or this mission that they're trying to accomplish, and they encounter obstacles, and it makes for an interesting story as they move towards whatever that goal is. And again, that's known as the journey of accomplishment. But then there's a second journey that hero is on, which is known as the journey of fulfillment. And it's more of an internal transformation that character is going through. They're discovering things about themselves. They're discovering new principles, values, and beliefs that just make their life work better. And that's what makes the hero compelling, or the story compelling. And so how that connects to me is, as I think about my life over the last 40 years, I see those 2 journeys that I've been on. From the standpoint of just being a parent, obviously we had a lot of things to accomplish. We had places to go, meals to cook, homework to help with. I mean, I like to say, we were 6 kids busy, as you can imagine. There was a lot of stuff to do. And we also experienced a lot of obstacles along the way. I mean, we dealt with everything from, let's say, a lost homework assignment to one of our children actually struggling with a learning disability. We had scrapes on the knees, but then I have a daughter that struggled with drugs and alcohol through high school and into college. We taught our kids how to ride a bike, but we also sent them off in cars, and they crashed those cars, right. So you deal with that. And then, as you can imagine, over 40 years from a marriage standpoint, we've had both sunny and cloudy days, over those 40 years. And actually we had 3, I like to use the analogy, we had 3 distinct hurricanes over our 40 years of marriage. These are times where, divorce was discussed. And so as I was going through my life, on this outside journey and doing all the stuff that a dad and a husband does, I was also experiencing this internal transformation, through this interest in personal development and parenting and family enrichment and, studying those materials. I was discovering principles, values, and beliefs that just made our family work better. This was this internal transformation that was happening as well. Right. And actually, it's hard to believe, it's been like 20 years ago, I wrote a definition of a successful family. It was sort of like, okay, and we've sort of talked about it already, but my definition included things like, a successful family speaks with respect, they honor differences, they empower each other, they provide a nurturing environment. They have a way of really appreciating the good times, but equally as important, they have a way and a knack of handling any difficult circumstances or issues that come their way. And then finally, the last line of this was, there's a sense of peace, joy, warmth, and love within the home. And so that was, sort of my definition of a successful family. And while our family doesn't always look like that, over time, we do more often than not. And then equally as important is if we start to get off track, again, a circumstance comes up or something happens that knocks us off our game, if you will, I now know how to lead us back. That's, part of that internal journey over time. And so where I am now is I just feel a calling to share some of the wisdom gained over the last 40 years. And so that was really the impetus for me forming the Family Enrichment Academy. That's the vehicle, if you will, that I'm using to share some of this wisdom. I mentioned I've written a book on parenting, for parenting teenagers. I do one-on-one coaching. I do workshops. I do just a variety of different ways of delivering content and working with people, all under the premise of how can I share some of what I've learned over my life as a parent. So that's the kind of the 40-year journey of how I got to this point with the Family Enrichment Academy. To your other question about my childhood and my parents,
Yes.
and probably a lot of people have this. My parents were really different. And so I took different things from each of them. My father was more of the logical, problem solving, and also actually very much believe in yourself. You can, I remember him saying, you never say the word can't. That was one of his favorite sayings. So he was kind of that sort of modeling, if you will, while my mother was more of provided the love in the family, if you will. She was the kindness, the generosity, the servant, she was the servant's heart within the family. And another interesting, as we all go through, my parents, though, did divorce when I was in high school. And so that's part of my background as well. So it's, we all have, in everybody, and again, back to the idea of journey, we all have these differences in our journey. You mentioned birth order. I'm the oldest, and I have one younger brother. So I come from a family of 2 boys. And so I have my own individual story, if you will, that helps to shape and develop, sort of mold who I am, just like all of us do. You have your story. You said you were one of 12, I believe you said,
Yes.
And that shapes and informs who you are. So, but that, so that's a little bit about my childhood anyway, in sort of the 2 different roles that my parents played.
Who would you say made the most impact on you? Was it your mom? Was it your dad? Grandparents?
No, I would say it wasn't a grandparent. I was close to both my mother and my father. And like I say, it's different. I think that servant's heart from my mother, that came from her, and the kind of the kindness, generosity, servant stuff from my mother. From my father, again, it was more of the belief. That was probably the thing. It was the belief in yourself and your abilities. That was something he definitely modeled, was a belief that he could do and accomplish things, and that he could figure it out. It's sort of, it's interesting. We talk about a growth mindset. One of the biggest benefits, I'll call it a benefit, of a growth mindset is that it creates hope, if you think about it. Because if you can grow and learn, there's always hope for the future, because you can change, right? Or you can change that future. And if somebody gets stuck, the common terms nowadays is the fixed mindset. That's what's used today is this idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. But if you have a fixed mindset and you believe things will never change, there's despair there, because there's no opportunity to make it better the next time around. And my dad was the ultimate in that growth mindset, in that you can find a way to make it work or to make it better. So that was probably the biggest thing. So it was really, I think, a kind of a combination of the 2. Now, an interesting, I'll just share this, a dynamic that's, again, part of my story is my father, when I was 20 years old, was in a very severe car accident.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and he experienced basically a brain injury, kind of like a concussion. They talk in football today about concussions and what have you. And interestingly, it really shifted our relationship. It almost like it flipped it, because he went through a period of time, and again, I was the oldest son, where I felt like I was the caretaker, if that makes sense. And it sort of reversed those roles. And it was a dynamic, and again, just part of my story going forward, that, and everybody has their stories that they tell, but for me, that was an interesting thing. And it was I mentioned it's like a gift sometimes. It was a struggle because, you mentioned like, I was, in some ways I was almost resentful, if you will. It's like, dang
Mhm.
it, why am I in this role now?
Yeah.
This is, you know,
You didn't
but
ask for it.
right. But it was, at the same time, it was an opportunity for me to grow and learn and develop and to be aware, oh, okay, maybe I'm not being as forgiving. I'm not being as
Mhm.
compassionate. It was really, the big thing was compassion. I mean, he was in a coma for like 6 weeks
Mm.
when he came out. He had to relearn everything. He had to relearn to walk, to chew, to eat,
Wow.
to talk, everything. And it's funny how sometimes that it brings up frustration. It's like I said, you start to feel like, but that's where the alternative is compassion.
Right.
How can I be compassionate in this scenario? And so while it was difficult, it also was a tremendous growth opportunity for me. And and that went on for years. I mean, it
Mm.
wasn't, this was well, yeah, it was 30 years, because he was 40 at the time,
Mm.
when he had the accident, and he ended up passing away right at 70. And
No.
he had a lot of health issues and complications as a result of that. So it was a 30-year journey of this back and forth. So it's interesting when you look at that dynamic. Um, and I know a lot of people have issues or struggles with them and their parents.
Right.
And part of the healing process is to be intentional about trying to heal those relationships as well.
Mhm.
And that's sometimes the first step that has to happen in order to be a better parent,
Yeah.
is you have to heal your relationship with your parent as part
Sure.
of that process.
Yeah.
And sometimes it may happen after their death or their passing.
Mhm.
If that's when it happens, it happens,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
without a doubt, without a doubt. A lot of people have to take the time to realize what maybe their parents were going through,
Yeah.
right? To under I think understanding can bring clarity, but you have to be willing to kind of almost step into their shoes, right? You could never step into their shoes, but it kind of almost, right?
Right.
Because we never know. We don't have that capability. No one does, to truly know what someone else was feeling or doing or thinking, right? But to do our best to try to understand, so we have some clarity as to maybe why they behaved a certain way. Why is it that, one dad was there for every kid's game and the other one could care less, or was working and couldn't, even though he cared, couldn't be there?
Right.
The mom who refused to cook. Why did she refuse to cook? What was what was going on with her? um, and the kids always ate takeout or pizza or whatever, from the drive-through or who knows what. So as a child, it's not always the easiest to deal with these things, but when you can be subjected to, let's stop thinking about you for a minute and let's think about them. Let's try to realize maybe what their childhood was like. So that's why I'm always amazed at, when we think about our childhood, how it has reflected onto the actions that we take as an adult,
Right.
and what it's made us, right? Whether it was a hardship or it was, easy breezy, and we had a great life with our family. There was no abuse, and everybody was nice, and you lived in a nice neighborhood. You didn't live in a slum. You didn't have to, avoid drug dealers or drugs and all these different things just to get from school to home. So there's all these different dynamics that the world sees, because it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, you're going to find one of those things that are going to happen in your life, right?
Right, right, absolutely. And it's the first step in that, what you're describing, is compassion.
Hmm.
And that's from a love-based mindset. You naturally extend compassion to other people and their pain. One of my little, I'll call it sayings or things I like to impart to parents, is the idea that any unwanted or quote unquote bad behavior, and this could, and I put it in context of a child, but I'll say it's true for any person. So
Mhm.
any unwanted or bad behavior is a call for love by that person. They're doing that, and what they're doing is they're reaching out saying, I need, and 9 times out of 10, I need to feel connected. I need to feel loved. I
Mhm.
need, that is what I'm missing. And so that's why they're acting the way they're acting. And the natural response, when you think of it from that perspective, is compassion, right?
Mhm.
How can I have some compassion for this person? And actually, I will say all of these relationships can be healed. That's one of the amazing attributes of love, and the love-based perspective is it heals first. And the next step after compassion is forgiveness. And we have to step into forgiveness and sort of, if you will, offer that, or be a source of forgiveness for people. And that helps to shift us. And then the natural next step from that then is gratitude. How can we have compassion for the person, we forgive or let go of our negative judgments about anything that's happened, and then look to what can I be grateful for about that relationship. So if you look to your parents, for example, what am I grateful for with regards to that relationship with that parent? And between those three steps, that starts to move you from being that anger, frustration, whatever that negative
Right.
emotion that you're experiencing. Now you start to experience more love and, like say, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude for that. And it shifts the perspective that you have for the parent in the case that we're talking about.
Mhm.
And then the final question is, how can I make a difference?
That's
And
it.
that becomes the action step. What can I do that's going to move this forward in a healing way and make a difference in this situation? As opposed to when you're fearful, the counter to what I just described, if you're in a fearful mindset, the first thing is, what did that person do that was wrong? You judge and you see, what's wrong with them. And then you look for, how did it hurt me, or how did it cause me pain and suffering? And
Mhm.
then the action step is, how can I defend myself? And so you go out to try to defend yourself.
Mhm.
But that doesn't heal. All that does is continue to damage and create a gap in that relationship.
Right.
And so if you can shift that to compassion, forgiveness first, what am I grateful for? How can I make a difference? That's more of a healing conversation then. And that's actually one of the strategies that I throw out for parents, as a way to create that shift in mindset if they catch themselves or they notice themselves being in a fearful place.
I love that because it is, catching that moment, right?
Yeah.
When you are in either position. When we think about, growing up, I think that, and we talked about a safe haven, but it's also all environments, right? Whether you go to a school and the teachers are there to help, or the teachers are just because it's a job to them.
Right.
It's not
Right.
their mission, right? If you go to the playground and there's a bunch of bullies on the playground, so it's all environmental as well, right?
Yeah, it definitely has an impact. And part as a parent, I'll give you an example, specific example from our family. You talk about teachers, for example.
Mm,
Um, we try to model and instill the idea of a love-based perspective.
right.
That's part of what I'm about, right?
Mhm,
And your teenager's going to go to school. This specifically happened for us. One of our daughters came home one day, and her comment was, my biology teacher is awful. They're the worst. And you can't make it through high school without them having a quote unquote bad teacher, right? It's all about, how bad they are and they can't teach and they're an awful person, blah, blah. She has this, that's her perspective at the
mhm,
moment. And there's two components to our response. One is around empowerment, which is, you know what? This isn't the last time you're going to have an obstacle in front of you, right? And
mhm,
so the question is, what can you do to if you still want to get a good grade in this class, how can you approach it differently? How can you set up a study group? There's empowerment component to having them become resourceful and being able to get around whatever that obstacle is. In this case, it happened to be the quote unquote bad teacher.
Right.
But then equally as important, in the second part of our conversation that we had, was the idea of shifting the daughter's perspective by introducing, people don't get into teaching unless they're passionate about teaching children, right? And if this teacher is not there, there's something going on for them. Again, it's the idea that bad or unwanted behavior is a call for love. Maybe we should have some compassion for them. We don't know what's going on in their life. Maybe their father's going through an illness, or maybe they're having issue within their family. I mean, we don't know what's happening for that person. And so from a love-based perspective, our response should be to offer compassion and forgiveness for them not fulfilling their role, maybe that they should fulfill. And then how can we make a difference? What can you do to support them and maybe, help them along their journey?
Right.
And so, we literally introduce that perspective and then let her take and do with it what she will. But part of the process is to use those opportunities as a way to, if you will, model and teach that mindset. And that turns it from a destructive, damaging situation to one that allows her to grow and develop as a person. And maybe she can heal that person. I mean, I've heard stories, it's, child that's struggling in high school, and there's one person in this, another kid that's maybe not even a friend, but they always smile and said hi to them as they walk by them at one particular class. And they don't realize how much of an impact that has on that child. And so that's part of the message, is how can you show your children that they can make a difference? And they do it by extending love and adopting more of that love-based mindset. And what's interesting about that is that fills them up. And that's what makes their life worth, that's where they get their purpose. And so it's an inside out process for all of us. We have to start to discover that the true source of purpose, joy, happiness, it's inside out. It's not outside in. It's not about somebody doing something that's going to make me happy. It's about me extending and serving others. That's where the happiness and the joy comes from.
Oh, yeah. You talked about purpose and your why and all that. And, maybe and you said that most people are in a profession, or teachers, is because maybe that's what they wanted to do. But I've come across teachers who eventually, they kind of fessed up to me that they hated being a teacher.
Right.
And therefore that's why they changed their career.
Right.
And I've spoken to people who did elementary teaching, and later on they realized they hated kids. I'm like, you hate kids? I'm like, yeah, I just don't like kids. I'm like, wow.
Well, and my response would be, again, it's compassion.
Yeah.
And it's not that they hate kids. There's hate inside of them.
Right.
And
part of it, like kids, period.
Right. Well, and part of the process, though, is to start to discover the love as an alternative to that hate that's inside.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Are you familiar with Wayne Dyer? Do you know that name? I don't know if you've ever heard he does this analogy with an orange. I don't know if have you heard or seen that analogy?
Yeah.
So I'll take 2 minutes. Do we have time for?
Sure.
So his analogy is that, he, with an audience, and I've done this in a workshop before that I've presented, where you have an orange and you ask the question, okay, if I take this orange and squeeze it, the question is what comes out? And, and again, it's not a trick question. The audience would say, well, orange juice is going to come out, right? If you squeeze the orange juice comes out. And then the follow-up question is, well, why is that? And again, to move through the process, I like to have fun with people as you do it. But the answer is that's because that's what's inside of an orange, right? There's no way I can squeeze an orange and never get apple juice to come out.
Right.
Or I can't, if I turn it upside down or do it a different way, I'm not going to get grape juice to come out. And the reason is because that's what's inside. So you extend that analogy to us as people. And in his description, he talks about, and life puts the squeeze on you. That is to say that someone says something negative about you, or that something doesn't go your way, or something quote unquote bad happens. That squeezes you. And what comes out of you is anger, disappointment, frustration, hatred in some cases. And then we tend to say, well, the reason that's coming out of me is because of what that person did, or it's because of the circumstance that I'm facing. That's why it came out.
Right.
And his point is, no, that's not why it came out. What comes out is what's on the inside, right? And it's inside of you. And when life squeezes, it comes out. And the opportunity we have is, we do have a choice, though. We can intentionally shift what's inside us. And if all we had inside us was love, when life put the squeeze on us, love would come out, right? Compassion, forgiveness, those things would come out of us, as opposed to anger, frustration, disappointment, all those other things that come out.
Yeah, no, without a doubt.
So that it's I love that analogy, though. And sometimes I'll talk about life putting the squeeze on us. And the question is, when it happens, what comes out of us? And we have a choice then on what, but it starts with making a choice on what's on the inside.
Yeah.
So,
a lot of, and I've spoken to a lot of different people who, when they found their why, they changed their life around, their purpose, and they changed careers.
Right.
Because they may have been in a career that was because it was a financial, or because they were following the guidance of their parents, because their parents and their great-grandparents and so on were in this type of career. Why are they not in it? And then all of a sudden they go, why am I doing this? Why am I doing it? It's not for me, it's for them.
Right.
And when we can find our own purpose, not the purpose of our parents, then that's what's going to make a difference and make us happy, and really get the juice really flowing out from us, right?
Right.
When we find that beautiful why that we all have.
Right. And that purpose is going to be aligned with serving others and extending love. That would be my argument, that it always, at the core of it, is always the desire and the want to extend love to other people. That's all of our purpose. And how we express that, some people do it as an accountant, other people do it as a minister at a church, other people do it as a coach. I know you do coaching, with athletics or whatever, but it's at the bottom of it, when you start to feel that purpose, it's when you are expressing and extending love and serving that other person, whatever the vehicle might be.
Right. I love your optimism, and it's awesome. I love it. I really do. Jim, thank you so much for being on here. So we did put up, your website, which is familyenrichmentacademy.com, but then you also have /questions. What is that about?
So I have, for parents with teenagers, one of the most common questions I get is, how do I get my teenager to open up to me, to talk more? Because they start to feel this disconnect. And the simple answer is, you ask better questions. And so the resource that I have, and it's a free resource, it's a gift, if you will, for your audience, is there are 10 questions you should never ask your teenagers. Think of these as like conversation killers, the ones that shut them down. And then as an alternative, I've got 10 great questions, the questions you should be asking, the ones that tend to open them up. And so it's a fun little free resource. It's a way to get people thinking a little bit. And we talk about perspective. It sort of shifts your perspective around questions and how you can engage with your teen. So again, it's a resource, and it's a way for people to connect to our community and the work that I'm doing.
Awesome. Love it. Jim, I really want to thank you for today, for not only clearing things up for us, right? To have that clarity as a parent, but even to have an understanding for your own parents, right? Because sometimes, your parents, maybe you don't have a connection with your parents anymore, and they're still around, but you haven't talked to them. So maybe pick up the phone, reach out, because maybe we didn't understand what they were going through when they were raising us.
Right.
So it's never too late to make that connection again, right?
Absolutely. Love heals all relationships, and it's just a matter of stepping into that. And there's all, I always like to tell people there's always hope. I don't care how it's been 50 years of bad, you can always heal it if you allow love to enter into that relationship.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So everybody go call your mom, call your dad, right? And hug your kids and just love, love, love. If more people loved, if more people had a safe haven to go home to,
Right.
and that would definitely help change the world. So thank you, Jim. I really, really appreciate you today.
My pleasure. It's been a joy. Thank you.
All right, you guys, everybody enjoy. Have a great day.